Tonight, we're heading deep into the Appalachian Mountains, where beauty and danger walk the same trail. The Appalachian Trail stretches more than 2,000 miles from Georgia to Maine, crossing forests, ridgelines, and wilderness so vast it feels endless. Every year, millions of hikers step onto it, chasing peace, adventure, and challenge. But not everyone comes back. Over the decades, hikers have vanished here without a trace. Experienced outdoorsmen, weekend backpackers, even children. Search parties fan out, dogs track scents, helicopters scour the canopy. And yet, in some cases, it's as if the trail itself swallows them whole. No gear, no footprints, no answers, just a silence that grows heavier the deeper you go. Some blame accidents, falls, exposure, getting lost in unforgiving terrain. Others whisper darker explanations, crimes hidden by the wilderness, or something older, something the mountains don't want you to see. These are not legends. These are not ghost stories. These are true missing persons cases from the Appalachian Trail, and once you hear them, you'll never walk those woods the same way again. Case 1. The Disappearance of Geraldine Largay, 2013, Maine. On July 22, 2013, 66-year-old Geraldine Largay woke up in her tent on the Appalachian Trail in western Maine. She had hiked more than 900 miles already, inching her way north from West Virginia with the dream of completing a full through hike. Fellow hikers called her Inchworm, a trail name she wore proudly. She wasn't the fastest, but she was steady, step by step. She was fulfilling a dream she'd carried for years. That morning, she left the Poplar Ridge lean-to, aiming for the Spaulding Mountain shelter less than 8 miles away. Her husband, George, was nearby to support her hike, meeting her at crossings to resupply and send her back into the wilderness with encouragement. The skies were clear, the air warm, and the trail alive, with the sound of cicadas and wind in the fir trees. Everything about the day seemed ordinary. At some point, Jerry stepped off the trail. Like countless hikers do every day, she went in search of privacy. A few steps into the woods, just far enough away from the blazed path to be unseen. But something happened in those few minutes. Maybe she turned the wrong way. Maybe she lost track of her bearings among the thick spruce. In an instant, the narrow footpath that stretched from Georgia to Maine disappeared from sight. When she didn't arrive at the Spaulding lean-to, other hikers began to notice. Calls were made. Searchers were mobilized. By nightfall, Jerry was officially missing. The search that followed became one of the largest in Maine's history. Dozens of wardens, rangers, volunteers, and helicopters fanned out through the mountains, pushing through dense brush and swampy hollows, combing every ridge and drainage they could reach. Search dogs were brought in, their noses pressed to the ground. Planes swept overhead, eyes straining for the glint of nylon tent fabric beneath the canopy. For days the effort grew. Hundreds of people walking shoulder-to-shoulder grids through one of the toughest landscapes in the East. And still, they found nothing. Weeks turned into months and hope faded. George Largay clung to it longer than most, convinced that somehow his wife might still be out there, waiting to be found. For 2 years, the mystery of Geraldine Largay haunted the trail. Hikers swapped theories over campfires. Some thought she'd fallen into a ravine. Others whispered about animals. A few simply shook their heads and said the woods had claimed her. In October 2015, the truth surfaced. A forester stumbled across a collapsed tent deep in the woods near Reddington Township. Inside lay skeletal remains, a sleeping bag, and a journal. The site was just 3 miles from the trail, hidden in a dense patch of forest that searchers had passed near many times. The remains were confirmed as Jerry's. The journal told the rest of the story. She had survived for 26 days after becoming lost. Her final entries, written in a steady but fading hand, were heartbreaking. She recorded her attempts to find the trail, her efforts to ration food and water, and eventually her acceptance that she might not be found. She left love notes for her husband and daughter, words of comfort meant to reach them long after she was gone. "When you find my body," one entry read, "please call my husband George. It will be the greatest kindness for him to know that I am dead where you found me." What makes the case chilling isn't only her survival, but how close she came to being rescued. Searchers passed within 100 yards of her campsite multiple times. Helicopters flew overhead, dogs swept through nearby valleys, and yet, hidden beneath the thick canopy, sitting quietly in her tent, she was missed again and again. Her phone contained text messages she had tried to send to her husband, each one a desperate call for help. None of them ever went through. The woods were too thick, the signal too weak. By the time her phone battery died, Jerry was truly alone. For hikers who know the story, it has become a cautionary tale. Jerry wasn't reckless. She was experienced, careful, and prepared. She did everything the way thousands of other hikers do, and still, one wrong turn sealed her fate. The Appalachian Trail is often described as crowded, even safe. But the truth is, it cuts through vast wilderness, where losing your bearings can mean vanishing in plain sight. Even years later, the small details linger like echoes. The searchers so close they could have shouted to her. The clawing silence of the forest as she waited. The image of her tent, collapsed under branches. Only discovered by chance 2 summers later. Perhaps the most unsettling detail of all is that she lived long enough to hear the search efforts in the distance, to hope that the next voice, the next bootstep, would find her, only to be disappointed again and again until the days ran out. Her husband has said he hopes people remember her not just for her tragic ending, but for the way she pursued her dream with courage. Hikers who pass through Maine sometimes pause to speak her trail name softly into the air, a gesture of respect to the woman called Inchworm. Her story has become part of the Appalachian Trail itself, a reminder of both the beauty and the danger of those long miles. Jerry's case forces an unsettling question into the minds of anyone who sets foot on the trail. If a determined woman could vanish and remain unfound for weeks just a few miles off the path, how many others have stepped away for just a moment and never come back? Case 2. Dennis Martin, 1969, Smoky Mountains, Tennessee / North Carolina border. Father's Day weekend, 1969. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park, straddling the border between Tennessee and North Carolina, was alive with families. The weather was warm, the meadows green, and the ridges rolled away into layers of blue haze that gave the Smokies their name. The Martin family, William, his sons, and grandfather, had chosen the park's Spence Field for their annual trip. It was a tradition, a chance for the boys to run wild in the high meadows while the adults enjoyed the mountain air. Dennis Martin was 6 years old, a quiet, smiling boy with a bowl cut and a gentle manner. He had hiked into the mountains with his father and older brother, carrying the small weight of his pack with pride. They met another family on the trail that weekend, also with children, and the kids quickly devised a game of hide-and-seek in the open meadow above the tree line. It was Father's Day, a perfect afternoon. No one could have imagined what would follow. The plan was simple. The kids would split up, circle around the field, and leap out to scare the adults. Dennis, small and eager to play, was told to take one side, while the other boys looped around the opposite edge. Laughter and giggles drifted on the breeze as sneakers padded through grass. The men sat back, amused at the children's excitement. But when the boys burst out of the trees, Dennis wasn't with them. At first, no one worried. Hide-and-seek meant hiding. His father, William, smiled and called his name. The meadow echoed with silence. The other boys pointed toward the brush, certain Dennis had chosen a better hiding spot. Minutes passed. The smiles faded. William stood, scanning the tree line, calling louder now. Dennis didn't answer. Within an hour, panic set in. The Martins scoured the area, shouting until their throats went raw. William sprinted nearly 2 miles down the trail, convinced Dennis might have walked further than expected. Park rangers were notified. As dusk fell, with rain clouds thickening above the ridges, the search began. That night, the heavens opened. Sheets of rain hammered the mountains, soaking every trail, every hollow, every pair of boots searching in the dark. The storm washed away tracks, muffled cries, and turned the slopes into a maze of mud and rivulets. If Dennis had left any sign of where he'd gone, it was gone by morning. The search grew into one of the largest in park history. Hundreds of people poured into the Smokies, rangers, volunteers, Boy Scouts, and eventually even the U.S. Army Green Berets. The Martin family watched in shock as uniformed soldiers set up base camps, bringing in helicopters, radios, and resources meant for war zones, not national parks. The operation was immense, with men spreading out across miles of wilderness, combing ridges, crawling through rhododendron thickets, sweeping drainages. Despite the numbers, the forest seemed to swallow every effort. No footprints, no scraps of clothing, no sign of a boy in sneakers and a red shirt. The terrain was brutal. Steep ridges, dense undergrowth, sudden drops into ravines. Volunteers sometimes got lost themselves, needing rescue after hours in the maze-like woods. Then came the whispers. On the same day Dennis vanished, another family hiking several miles away reported something strange. They told rangers they had seen what looked like a rough-looking man moving quickly through the woods, carrying something over his shoulder. The description unsettled investigators. Tall, disheveled, unkempt. Some versions of the report even described him as wild-eyed, like a wild man living off the land. The story slipped into rumor, repeated by locals who believed feral people lived deep in the Smokies, far from civilization. Officials never confirmed the account in detail, but the timing was enough to keep speculation alive for decades. William Martin clung to the hope that his son had simply wandered too far, perhaps injured, but still alive. Day after day he joined the search parties, trudging mile after mile through slick mud, shouting his boy's name into the unforgiving green silence. Nights were the worst, lying awake with rain hammering the tent, imagining Dennis out there alone in the dark, cold, afraid. Weeks passed. The Green Berets packed up and left. The official search wound down. The Martins returned home without their son. The case never closed. For years, William Martin returned to the Smokies, sometimes alone, sometimes with volunteers, determined to find even a scrap of evidence. Nothing ever surfaced. No bones. No clothing. No trace. To this day, Dennis Martin's disappearance remains one of the most haunting mysteries in Appalachian Trail lore. He vanished not in some remote hollow, but in broad daylight, surrounded by family, in one of the busiest national parks in the country. He disappeared in a matter of seconds, swallowed by a landscape that had no right to be so unforgiving. Theories abound. Some believe Dennis fell into one of the steep sinkholes, common in the area, his body concealed forever beneath rocks and roots. Others think he became disoriented in the rain and wandered miles off course, succumbing to exposure before searchers could reach him. Still others whisper about the wild man sighting. Whether a feral human, an abductor, or something stranger, no one can say. What lingers is the eerie sense of closeness. Search parties were everywhere. Footsteps and voices filled the valleys. And yet, Dennis was never found. Just as with Gerry Largay decades later, the haunting detail is that people may have passed within a stone's throw of him and never known. For hikers who pass through Spence Field today, the meadow looks as serene as it did that Father's Day in 1969. Grass ripples in the wind. Mountains rise blue on the horizon. It is hard to reconcile the beauty with the sorrow it holds. Parents clutch their children a little tighter. Hikers pause longer at the tree line. The silence of that place feels different, heavier. Every year, stories of Dennis Martin resurface among hikers and locals alike. Some tell it as a cautionary tale for parents. Others lean into the folklore, insisting the Smokies harbor secrets, things that move unseen in the dense undergrowth. Whether grounded in fact or warped by time, the story endures because it strikes at a primal fear, that someone can vanish in plain sight, even with eyes all around, and never return. Dennis Martin was only 6 years old. His life ended, or perhaps simply disappeared, on a sunny afternoon in one of the most visited parks in America. And no one, not his father, not the Green Berets, not the hundreds of searchers who clawed through the mountains for weeks, ever found him. The Smokies keep their secrets well, and Dennis remains one of them. Joel Polson, 1981, Smokies, Tennessee. It was the summer of 1981 when the Smokies felt particularly alive, heavy with fog in the mornings, thick with the smell of wet earth and pine resin, the kind of atmosphere where sound seems to travel differently. That year, a Boy Scout troop from Tennessee set out for a trek through the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, following the Appalachian Trail corridor that snakes across ridgelines and through dense hardwood forest. The trip was meant to be a rite of passage, led by an experienced scoutmaster named Joel Polson. At 28 years old, Joel wasn't just a leader. He was a seasoned hiker who had been guiding scouts into the backcountry for years. He was the kind of man people trusted with their kids, responsible, steady, and deeply familiar with these trails. That makes what happened all the harder to explain. The troop was moving along a section of the AT, their packs strapped tight, boots crunching over roots and gravel. For most of the hike, Joel took the lead, setting the pace and pointing out trail markers. It wasn't unusual for him to scout slightly ahead, to check the next bend or ridge before the boys followed. But on this day, something went wrong. Joel moved ahead and never came back into view. At first, nobody panicked. Hikers drift apart sometimes on the AT. One person stops to tie a bootlace, another steps off to refill a canteen, someone else takes a faster pace. Joel was only supposed to be a few hundred yards ahead, well within earshot. The troop continued along, expecting to spot him wading up the trail. But as the minutes stretched into half an hour, then longer, the realization set in. Joel wasn't ahead of them. Somewhere between the last stretch of switchbacks and the ridgeline, he had disappeared. The boys called his name until their voices cracked. They retraced their steps, scouring the forest on both sides of the trail. There was no answer, no movement in the underbrush, no sign of Joel. Eventually, the troop was forced to hike back to the trailhead and alert park rangers. What followed was one of the largest search operations in Smoky Mountain history up to that point. Dozens of rangers, volunteers, and even helicopters combed the ridges and valleys where Joel was last seen. The Appalachian Trail is well marked in this section of the park. It isn't the kind of path where an experienced leader should get lost. Yet day after day, no trace of him was found. The terrain worked against them. The Smokies are infamous for their steep drop-offs, sudden weather shifts, and dense undergrowth that can swallow footprints within hours. The summer rains came down hard that week, erasing tracks and filling creeks until they raged too loud to hear over. Every call into the trees was swallowed by the roar of water and the endless chorus of cicadas. It took days before the search teams found him. Joel's body was eventually located off-trail, far enough from the Appalachian corridor that many searchers had almost given up hope. The discovery answered one question but opened up several more. Why had he left the trail? Joel was experienced, not a novice prone to careless mistakes. He knew the golden rule of hiking: stay on the trail, especially when leading others. To find him deep in the brush, away from the marked path, raised unsettling possibilities. Had he seen something and gone to investigate? Had he become disoriented, despite decades of knowing how to read the land? Or had something else caused him to step away from safety? Accounts of his condition vary in retellings, but one detail remains constant. There was no immediate, obvious reason for his disappearance to have ended in death. He wasn't injured in a fall down a ravine. He wasn't trapped under a log or pinned by rocks. It was as if he had simply wandered into the trees and never come back. For his troop, the boys who had looked up to him, who had trusted him with their lives out in the wilderness, the memory was haunting. They had been only a short distance behind, close enough that they should have heard a cry if he'd fallen, or seen movement if he'd strayed. Instead, the forest had been silent. Joel was there one moment, gone the next. Even park officials struggled with the case. On paper, it was explained as a tragic accident, a capable hiker who, for reasons unknown, left the trail and became lost in the unforgiving terrain of the Smokies. But unofficially, rangers admitted their discomfort. This wasn't a teenager with no experience. This was a man who knew better than anyone how quickly the mountains could turn on you, and how essential it was to stay oriented. For him to vanish so completely, so suddenly, didn't make sense, and it wasn't lost on anyone that Joel's disappearance took place in the same mountains, where, just 12 years earlier, 6-year-old Dennis Martin had vanished without a trace. The Smokies had claimed people before and would again. But the idea of two such strange vanishings, one of a child, one of a leader, added weight to the sense that there are places in these mountains where the ordinary rules don't apply. For the families, the closure of recovering Joel's body was small comfort. They buried him with the honors of a man who had given years of service to youth and community. But around the campfires and in hushed conversations between hikers, his story became something else. A warning that hikers who knew the tale began to pass it down in the way such stories always do. Don't step off the trail. Remember Joel Poulsen. They spoke of how easily even the most experienced could vanish, how the Smokies could play tricks on the senses, luring you just a few steps off course until the canopy closed in and the path was gone forever. The Appalachian Trail runs more than 2,000 miles, but this section, the mist-heavy valleys and steep ridges of Tennessee and North Carolina, carries a reputation of its own. For some, Joel's fate is a reminder of the wilderness's indifference. For others, it suggests something stranger. The way people seem to vanish without reason in these mountains, as though the Smokies themselves are keeping secrets. Joel Poulsen's death was officially ruled a tragic accident. But in the Appalachian Trail community, his story has never been filed away so neatly. His disappearance still circulates among hikers as one of the Smokies' enduring mysteries, and it still leaves people asking the same uneasy question. How does a man who knew the trail better than most simply step away from it and never return? Case 4. Meredith Emerson, 2008, Georgia. The Appalachian Trail in northern Georgia has a way of lulling hikers into a sense of ease. The foothills there are softer than the jagged peaks farther north, and in January, when the trees are bare, you can see ridgelines roll for miles. That's where 24-year-old Meredith Emerson set out for a day hike on New Year's Day 2008. She was experienced, athletic, and careful, the kind of hiker who kept her gear in order and her routes well chosen. She was also accompanied by her dog, a black Labrador mix named Ella, a loyal companion who rarely left her side. That morning, she parked near the trailhead of Blood Mountain, one of the most popular hiking spots in Georgia, a section that overlaps with the Appalachian Trail. Other hikers saw her heading up the path, cheerful, confident, with Ella trotting just ahead. For many, it was just another hiker on a crisp winter morning. But for Meredith, it would be her last hike. As the day unfolded, people noticed something strange. A man had been lingering on the trail. Older, scruffy, carrying a pack. He seemed out of place compared to the younger crowd that often flocked to Blood Mountain. Some hikers remembered passing him near Meredith. Others thought they'd seen the two walking at roughly the same time. Nobody suspected that what they were witnessing was the beginning of a crime that would haunt the Appalachian Trail community for years. Meredith never returned home that evening. Calls to her phone went unanswered. Friends grew anxious. When her car was found still parked at the trailhead, authorities knew something was wrong. A search began almost immediately, drawing rangers, deputies, volunteers, and soon the national media. The details that emerged painted a picture of horror in contrast to the peaceful setting. Meredith hadn't simply gotten lost. She hadn't slipped on ice or wandered from the trail. She had encountered a predator, not an animal, but a man. His name was Gary Hilton, a drifter in his 60s with a history of violent behavior. He had been stalking hikers in the region, and on that day, he chose Meredith. Witnesses later pieced together that he followed her, cornered her, and abducted her. The one who managed to escape was her dog. Ella was found days later, wandering free, still wearing her harness, exhausted but alive. It was the dog's survival that first gave searchers hope. Maybe Meredith was out there, injured but alive, waiting to be found. But as hours stretched into days, the truth grew darker. Hilton eventually confessed to killing her. The crime was brutal, carried out in the woods not far from where hikers had seen the two crossing paths. He had targeted her because she was alone, because she seemed like someone he could overpower. For hikers who heard the story, the realization was chilling. The Appalachian Trail has always carried risks, injuries, weather, getting lost. But the idea that another human could be the danger, waiting in the same woods where people sought solitude and peace, made Meredith's death a different kind of terror. Search teams who had combed those woods remembered the eerie silence of the forest, the feeling that they were looking for someone who might be hiding just beyond the tree line. For weeks afterward, hikers in northern Georgia said they felt watched on the trail, the comfort of the AT community suddenly fractured by suspicion. Meredith's death struck a nerve not just because of the violence, but because of who she was. She had grown up loving the outdoors, a young professional who spent her free time exploring trails and training her dog. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't naive. She represented the thousands of hikers who head out each year, believing the trail is a safe place. The shock rippled beyond Georgia. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy, usually focused on conservation and hiker safety regarding wilderness hazards, found itself speaking about stranger danger in the backcountry. Rangers began urging solo hikers, especially women, to take extra precautions. Buddy systems were emphasized. Campsites that had always been open and trusting grew more cautious, more guarded. But the most haunting detail is the one that lingers in campfire retellings and hiker forums even now. Meredith wasn't lost to the wilderness. She was lost to something worse, proof that sometimes the most dangerous predator on the trail isn't hidden in the trees or waiting in the shadows. It walks on two legs, smiling, pretending to be harmless until it strikes. Her story remains one of the Appalachian Trail's most infamous tragedies. Some hikers refuse to even pass through Blood Mountain without thinking of her. Others say the place feels different now, as if the forest itself remembers. Hikers who stop at the overlooks, gazing across the rolling ridges, sometimes leave flowers or tokens, small reminders that Meredith's name is not forgotten. What makes her story so unsettling is how ordinary the day began. A New Year's hike, a dog by her side, a crowded trail where dozens of others were out enjoying the same sunshine. And yet, in the span of a few hours, she slipped from the normal rhythm of a hiker's day into a nightmare. The Appalachian Trail is a place of freedom, but it's also a place of vulnerability. Alone in the woods, far from help, every hiker makes a silent bargain that the trail will be kind, that strangers they meet will be friendly, that the wilderness will test them but not destroy them. Meredith's story is the reminder of how fragile that bargain is. When hikers tell her story today, they often end with the same thought: she didn't do anything wrong. She was simply out there, walking the trail like so many others, and that may be the most chilling part of all. Her death was not an unsolved mystery like some other Appalachian Trail vanishings. Authorities knew what happened, and they knew who did it. But in some ways, that makes it worse. Because the horror isn't in what we can't explain. It's in what we can. Even now, when hikers in Georgia step onto the trail, they sometimes glance over their shoulders a little more often, remembering the young woman with the black dog who never came home from Blood Mountain. And in the quiet stretches of the Appalachian Trail, where the trees close in and the only sound is your own footsteps, there's always the unspoken thought: out here, you're never truly alone. Case 5. Scott Lilly, 2011, Virginia. In the summer of 2011, hikers on the Appalachian Trail in Virginia came across something they could not forget. Just south of the tiny town of Buena Vista, a group moving through the brush caught a whiff of something wrong in the air. The smell was faint at first, but it grew stronger the further they went. It was the kind of smell no one mistakes, the smell of death. Following it, they discovered a shallow grave near Cow Camp Gap, a remote section of trail. The body buried there was later identified as that of Scott Lilly, a 30-year-old hiker from Indiana. He had gone missing weeks earlier, and the way his life ended still raises more questions than answers. Scott Lilly was known on the trail by his nickname, Stonewall. He wasn't just passing through. He was one of those dreamers who wanted to walk every mile, from Georgia all the way to Maine. To friends and family, the hike was a symbol of his independence and his love for the outdoors. He carried himself with the enthusiasm of a man who had found his purpose, logging long days through Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains. By late July of 2011, he had reached the Three Ridges Wilderness. Other hikers remembered him as friendly and talkative, a man who shared campfires and conversations before moving on. But then the trail went quiet. No one saw him at the next shelter. He never checked in at the next resupply town. At first, fellow hikers assumed he had slowed down or taken a break. Trail rhythm varies, and it's not unusual to lose track of people for a while. But weeks passed, and Stonewall never reappeared. His family began to worry when phone calls and messages went unanswered. Soon, his name shifted from casual conversation to missing persons bulletins. When his body was found, it was clear he had not simply wandered off the trail and died by accident. He had been buried. Investigators determined he had died from asphyxiation. Someone had intentionally taken his life and hidden him beneath the soil, just a stone's throw from the Appalachian Trail. His gear was missing, his pack gone, and with it, much of the evidence that might have explained what happened. The shock reverberated through the trail community. The Appalachian Trail is often romanticized as a place of peace, a long green tunnel of solitude and fellowship. Violence is rare, and murder rarer still. Yet here was undeniable proof that danger did not always come from storms or hypothermia. Sometimes it came from other people. Searchers and investigators retraced his last known movements, piecing together his final days. Witnesses placed him at shelters near the Ty River, a rugged area where the trail winds along steep ridges and plunges into valleys thick with brush. He had been cheerful, even talking about finishing his through hike. Nothing about him suggested despair, illness, or a desire to vanish. And yet, within days, he was gone. The FBI took the unusual step of joining the investigation, treating Scott Lilly's death as a homicide. They canvassed the area, interviewed hikers, and combed through tips. But the wilderness has a way of swallowing evidence. Time, weather, and the sheer vastness of the mountains worked against them. No suspect was ever publicly named. No one was arrested. Among hikers, theories spread quickly. Some believed he had crossed paths with the wrong person. A drifter, perhaps, or someone using the trail for reasons other than hiking. The Appalachian Trail is accessible from countless road crossings, which makes it easy for anyone to slip into its corridors unnoticed. Others wondered if another hiker had turned violent. In the close-knit world of shelters and campsites, personalities sometimes clash. But no one who knew Scott Lilly believed he had provoked violence. He was remembered as kind, easygoing, a man who made friends easily. What haunted many was how close he had been to safety. His burial site was not deep in the backcountry. It was close to the trail, close enough that dozens of hikers must have passed within yards of where he lay. Some may even have camped nearby, cooking dinner or pitching tents, never realizing that just beyond the trees, beneath a thin layer of earth, one of their own was buried. The eeriest detail is that searchers, like in Geraldine Largay's case, may have passed close without knowing. The Appalachian Trail shelters in Virginia are heavily traveled, and the area around Cow Camp Gap was searched more than once. But thick brush and rugged terrain can hide even the most obvious signs. For weeks, Scott Lilly lay undiscovered while life on the trail continued just yards away. To this day, his case remains unsolved. The FBI continues to list it as an open homicide, occasionally re-releasing appeals for information. The details remain as stark as they were in 2011. A young man set out to walk the trail of his dreams, and someone ended his journey before he could finish. Hikers who pass through the region sometimes stop at Cow Camp Gap to pay their respects. They speak of him in hushed tones, as though saying his name out loud might stir whatever shadows remain. Some feel unease at camping alone there, the way the trees seem to close in after dark, the silence that feels too heavy. Others light a small fire and share stories, honoring a fellow traveler who never made it home. The mystery of Scott Lilly is not just about a single man. It is about the fragility of safety in the wilderness, about how quickly the line between peace and danger can blur. One moment you are sharing a meal at a shelter, the next you are gone, your absence explained only by a shallow grave and unanswered questions. Families of other missing hikers watch his case with sorrow. They know how easily disappearances can be explained away as accidents, how hard it is to demand answers when the forest covers its own secrets. But Scott Lilly's case proves something chilling. Sometimes hikers do not vanish into the wilderness. Sometimes they are taken from it. As the years pass, his story remains one of the Appalachian Trail's darkest chapters. Every season, new hikers set foot on the trail, chasing their own dreams of walking from Georgia to Maine. And somewhere along the ridges of Virginia, the memory of Stonewall lingers, a reminder that for all the beauty the Appalachian Trail holds, it also carries shadows, shadows that whisper of the unsolved, the missing, and the lives cut short beneath the trees. Case 6. Geraldine Largay, 2013, Maine. She was known by a simple trail name, Inchworm. To those who met her on the long green tunnel of the Appalachian Trail, that name stuck faster than her real one. Hikers choose names for many reasons. Sometimes they're given after a stumble, sometimes they're chosen with care, and sometimes they're born from quirks on the trail. For Geraldine Largay, it came from her slow, deliberate pace, a rhythm that was steady rather than fast. She moved like an inchworm, step by patient step, never rushed, always determined to get where she was going. She wasn't chasing speed records. She was chasing the dream of finishing the Appalachian Trail. In the summer of 2013, Geraldine set out like thousands of others before her, hiking north through Maine. She was 66 years old, a retired nurse from Tennessee, and this was the adventure she had been planning for years. Her husband supported her journey, meeting her at resupply points, mailing food drops, and staying in touch by text whenever she had signal. By all accounts, she was prepared, experienced enough to handle long days, and more than capable of managing herself on the trail. On July 22, 2013, everything changed. Somewhere between the lean-tos near the Saddleback mountain range and her next meeting point with her husband, Geraldine stepped off the trail. Not far, not recklessly. Just far enough to find a private spot. Every hiker knows that reality. Sometimes you leave the path for just a few minutes, answering nature's call in the woods. You keep your bearings, you make your way back, and in less than 10 minutes, you're back on the white-blazed corridor. But Geraldine didn't make it back. No one knows exactly how far she wandered before she realized she'd lost her bearings. The Appalachian Trail is marked by white blazes, painted at regular intervals on trees and rocks. As long as you keep one in sight, you can always orient yourself. Step too far off, however, and the wilderness closes in quickly. The trees look the same in every direction. The ridges twist and double back. 1 minute, you're 100 feet from the trail. The next, you're hopelessly turned around. Geraldine carried a cell phone, but in that section of Maine, signal was unreliable. Her attempts to call her husband went unanswered. Searchers later found her phone logs, showing that she had tried again and again to reach someone. She even sent text messages, one pleading for help and describing that she was lost. The texts never went through. When she didn't meet her husband at their arranged point, he sounded the alarm. What followed was one of the largest search efforts in Maine history. Helicopters swept the ridges. Ground teams fanned out, calling her name. Volunteers combed through valleys and thickets. For days, then weeks, then months, they searched. They found nothing. The Appalachian Trail community reeled. It wasn't unusual for hikers to lose their way for a day or two, only to turn up later in town. But Geraldine simply vanished. Her trail name, Inchworm, began appearing on posters, in news stories, in online forums, where strangers tried to piece together what might have happened. 2 years later, the mystery broke. In October 2015, surveyors stumbled upon a collapsed tent in a dense section of forest, less than 3 miles from the Appalachian Trail. Inside were human remains, a sleeping bag, and Geraldine's belongings. Her journal was there too, pages protected in a waterproof bag. What those pages revealed was heartbreaking. She had survived for nearly a month. Each day she carefully recorded her struggle. She wrote of rationing food, of her attempts to make signals for rescuers, of her longing for her family. The final entries grew weaker, her handwriting shaky, but even then she remained composed, her nurse's pragmatism carrying her until the end. She had accepted her fate with a kind of calm bravery, leaving behind words for her loved ones. The most chilling revelation was how close rescuers had come. Search teams had walked within 100 yards of her campsite multiple times during the initial effort. They called out her name. Their dogs sniffed the air. Yet dense vegetation, rugged terrain, and the cruel tricks of acoustics kept them from finding her. She likely heard them. She may have even called back, her voice muffled by the walls of spruce and fir. Rescue and loss passed within earshot of each other, separated by just enough distance to leave her undiscovered. The story of Inchworm spread far beyond the Appalachian Trail community. To hikers, it was more than a tragedy. It was a warning. The simplest mistake, stepping off the marked path for just a moment, could spiral into disaster. Geraldine had done nothing reckless. She had not underestimated the trail. She had followed the same pattern thousands follow every day. And yet the forest swallowed her whole. Hikers still talk about her case in shelters and at campfires, They remind each other never to wander too far without marking your way. They stress the importance of a whistle, a GPS beacon, and staying on the blazes no matter what. They do not tell her story to frighten, but to remind. The trail is beautiful, but it is not forgiving. What lingers most is the image of her tent, still pitched, her final camp never broken down. It stood as if waiting for her to return, nestled deep in the undergrowth, hidden in plain sight for 2 long years. The journal inside transformed her from just another name on a missing persons list into a voice, a person whose thoughts carried through to the end. Geraldine's disappearance echoes with the stories of others, especially women who hiked alone. Some, like her, left the path for just a moment and never came back. Others encountered dangers not from the wilderness but from the people within it. Together, these stories remind hikers of the fragility of solitude, how a moment's decision can become the difference between life and death. The wilderness does not conspire, but it does not forgive. Geraldine knew that, and her writings prove she faced it with courage. Her last words to her family were not of fear, but of love, scratched out with dwindling strength in the quiet shadows of Maine's forest. When new hikers set out today, many carry her memory with them. They say her name, they tell her story, and they double-check that they never leave the line of white blazes. Because if inchworm could vanish so close to the trail, then so could anyone. The Appalachian Trail is more than a path between Georgia and Maine. It is a world unto itself, beautiful and brutal, giving and taking without reason. Geraldine Largay's journey ended there, but her story travels with everyone who dares to walk the same ground. And somewhere in the silence of the Maine woods, her tent still stands in memory, a reminder of how thin the line can be between the trail and the wilderness that waits on either side. The Appalachian Trail has always been more than a footpath. For some, it's a dream, a ribbon of wilderness winding through 14 states, a chance to measure yourself against the land and return home changed. But for others, it becomes something else entirely. A place where the trees seem to swallow sound, where a wrong step or a wrong choice can erase you as if you were never there at all. The stories we've walked through tonight, Gerry Largay, Dennis Martin, Joel Polson, Meredith Emerson, Scott Lilly, and others remind us that this trail is breathtaking, but merciless. It doesn't just test your stamina. It tests whether anyone will ever know what happened if you vanish. And the truth is, these aren't just legends. They aren't whispers passed from campsite to campsite. They're real people, with real families, whose names are etched into the trail's history. Yet even now, answers are missing. The Appalachian Trail keeps its secrets well. The path is still out there tonight, stretching across mountains, valleys, and forests that grow darker when the sun dips low. And so are the mysteries. If you step into those woods, remember this: not every hiker who starts the journey makes it home.